All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining our installment of the Braze Innovation Series, where we'll be diving into all things gamification. Really excited for the folks who've got on the phone today to walk through a couple key components of how we think about gamification. So today on the call is myself. My name is Bobby Tishy. I'm the Chief Solutions Officer here at Stitch, and I'm also joined by Scott, Rick, Hannah, and Mike. Scott is a marketing strategist on our team. Rick is a technical producer along with Hannah. And then Mike is a solution architect on our team as well. So as we're going through, if you all have questions, feel free to go ahead and throw them in the chat. Don't feel like you have to wait until the end, and we'll get to them throughout the time today. And if we don't get to them, we'll get to them at the end of the webinar itself. So there's going to be four key things that we chat through today. First is more around strategy, why gamification, why we think it's an important strategy to begin with, but then how do you even start to think about what a game should look like for you and for your customers. Next is actually designing the gamification experience. Then we'll talk through building the game itself and what that looks like in and around Braze. And then lastly, we'll talk through measuring success. So how do we make sure that based on everything that we do and everything that we build in the game, how do we make sure we're able to report on it and see if it was successful or not? So to kick us off, Scott, I'll kick it over to you to start talking through how we set the strategy for gamification.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. Thanks, everyone, for being here to hear me nerd out about gamification strategy. So, what is gamification? It is really just motivation through design. It's building specific rewards, intuitive actions, and fun experiences for our customers. So, really get them to exhibit the behavior we want them to. So, it's giving them familiar mechanics, points, milestones, achievements, streaks to help them see progress and recognize the value of their actions through whatever experience you've put them through. So this makes our customers more inclined to return, explore, and take action, giving those clear signals and providing meaningful touch points. The result of this, which we would love to see for you in the future, is higher engagement, richer data, stronger activation, and deeper loyalty experiences. So, why does gamification matter from a business perspective? So, we know it boosts engagement and retention. So, we know interactive experiences encourage users to stay active and return to your app. We know it drives conversion. So, gamified incentives create more urgency and motivate purchases or desired actions. Enhances the personalization aspect. So we can have dynamic gamification that adapts to user behavior, providing tailored experiences that increase relevance and effectiveness. And it collects the valuable first party or zero party data that you're looking for to learn more about your customers and provide better segmentation. With the overall goal of what it does for you is create a better user experience and a better customer experience. So the four major components when we start to look at like how do we actually build a game are first we're talking about defining strategy. So we really want to clarify what we're gamifying, why, and kind of what business problem it's going to solve. We need to set some clear goals and objectives with what we're going to do. So when we move on to designing the experience, which is establishing the game world, how the game actually works, if there's an emotional arc over a long-term game that we want players to feel and follow, that they understand the rule structure, sort of the mechanics that we're asking them to complete, that narrative story, as well as the different sort of player types that exist. And that's how their personalization applies to it, but also definitely including legal and finance in this. When we think about building from like a core components perspective and the things that we have to stack out to actually make this experience engaging and sticky, we're looking at rewards and incentives. We're looking at the progression feedback model, challenges and competition that we can layer in there, and how we relate this back to social interaction on a broader scale. Lastly, we look at the iterate and optimize phase. So we measure, refine, and improve the long-term engagement through this, which with a continuous feedback loop.
Is there such a thing as a like too simple or too complex game?
I think you can definitely go too complex. Where if you see if we have like multiple steps in a game where the rules are unclear, or you're really trying to stretch it out over like you have to do 37 different things, that's going to lose a lot of people and they're not going to get to the sort of reward. When you go simple, you can start like very, very simple and get people used to sort of building this ecosystem out. So there's too complex. I wouldn't say there's too simple.
Awesome. Thanks.
Right. So, what types of gamification can you actually build once you sort of established the strategy in the upfront? You're thinking about design, you're thinking about narrative, you're thinking about how rewards could play into this. So, there's four main types. The first one is progression. So this is around pathing and habit building. So, you really want to guide users towards a high value repeat behavior. This meets, various business objectives, whether it's retention, it's habit formation, it's increased visit or purchase frequency, and some example mechanics that you can layer in here are levels and streaks. The next one we move on to is education and mastery. So this is providing that real value unlock of your brand. So we show users how to faster get to key behavior and really reinforce that. So this is around feature adoption, reducing confusion, lowering the friction point for customers, and that can be everything from a tutorial, a quiz, or a achievement milestone. Then we move on to enjoyment. So this is around play and delight. So this is creating that intrinsic fun experience and really engaging with your brand and having your brand being seen in a different light. So this leads to high session engagement, emotional affinity, positive brand score. This is mini games, seasonal events, sort of randomness collectibles that you insert. This is like for the fans, if you will. And then when we move on to social status, this is around competition and community. So we're really trying to motivate users through recognition and shared experiences. This is around network effects, viral amplification, long-term stickiness within your brand. And this is best represented through leaderboards or sort of community goals.
Not necessarily as a strategist, but as a consumer, what is your favorite type of game?
I mean, like if you want to get like deep onto actual how games are built, there's generally like different types of like audiences you build for. I am a big fan of enjoyment just because like who doesn't love a fun game? I think from a business perspective, always going back to being a strategist, I think progression is really helpful for building those habits and getting users stickier within your program.
See, I don't know that Taco Bell meant it to be a competition, but when they launched earlier this year, the can't are you Cantina or are you Caliente? And like everybody at Stitch was doing the quiz to figure out which one they were because everyone wanted to be Caliente. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. And so here are some mock-ups of some different types of games that you can create from and gamified experiences. So we have a great swipe example here. This is really good for collecting that preference data on users. What seems like a simple sort of action of like I'm this or I'm that is really helping us generate a better understanding of who you are as a user, and then we can do follow-up comms around that. Spin to win is another really great one, especially in the sort of retail or hospitality space. If you're trying to really get users to feel like they're getting something unique, even if it will always flip to 10%, the option of feeling like you could win something more is a great motivator. We see progression on the next one, which is great for just about any brand if you're looking at progressive profiling or finding ways to motivate users to give you more of that zero-party data and buy in longer to your brand as a process. And then matching games are just a ton of fun in the QSR space where you're specifically having users get more familiar with individual products that you have, while also trying to win something as a reward, which is a product for your QSR brand. So it's a great way to just reinforce the value there. And lastly, when we're talking about all the pieces that need to be involved in the sort of upfront strategy piece, we know that CRM teams are not on an island by themselves and often work with a ton of different cross-functional partners. So really trying to get everyone to buy in on the experience you're building, knowing that you'll rely on, your data and analytics team, your loyalty team, your e-commerce team, your legal and finance team heavily, as well as your creative team to produce assets, and the product team to actually get the game live. It takes a village. So just being very mindful of those constraints as they come forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. So as we think about the strategy, we've got that a good foundation there of what kind of games there are, why we should do these games, the different benefits that they give us as a brand, but also to our customers. Next, we think about how do we actually design that experience. So, Hannah, I'll kick it over to you to start walking us through how to concept and create these games.
Awesome. Thank you. So like Scott just walked us through all the way from strategy to being able to see some end examples, This is everything that's going to be in between. So at the beginning, the kind of requirements you always want to keep top of mind is definitely that you're solving your goal for your business, that your timeline is realistic, all the dev that goes on. Make sure that if it's a game revolved around something that's a limited time offering, or if it's something that's always going to be available, make sure to keep the timeline top of mind to see kind of like what Bobby had touched on, whether how simple or how complex that timeline will define a lot of those things. Next, when you move to that proof of concept, making sure that the development's possible, making sure that it flows with the brand, with the look of the app, if it goes full screen or if it's partial screen, making sure whatever's in the background is showing complements the game and doesn't distract from it. So next you'll go to starting to make those wireframes. So really bringing that game to life. With the wireframes, you want to keep in mind if it's a mobile game, your screen size is going to vary. Rick goes in more depth on this on the next slide, but just making sure that it's always accessible as you're building out that design, as you move from wireframes to high fidelity mockups, making sure that your text is always readable, that your legal copy is always where it needs to be, and is accessible there. But making sure that also if there's animations, we go through a few different approaches for animations and transitions, but making sure to test those ones in the app, making sure it gives the ideal user experience and doesn't come off as too busy or too distracting when you actually are able to test it. And then next, which we touch on more, is the development, so rapid prototyping. This is where collaboration between design and the devs comes in handy a lot, so that way you can test, make sure your transition, if you're like, hey, this comes off as a little more distracting, what are our other options? Design can hop in and help optimize it for that ideal user experience.
I think that step one to step two is really important because I think a lot of times we might come up with a great idea or a client might come up with a great idea and then we build it out in a proof of concept and we realize, oh, it's not nearly as great as what we thought it was. So we got to make a small tweak before we keep going.
Yeah, 100%. Now pass
Okay,
that to
I'll
Mike.
jump in. Yeah, unless you have more to
All you.
add. Okay, so there's a ton of information on this slide. I think this might be our most info-heavy slide that we have today. I'm not going to cover each bullet point here. There's just a lot to cover, but I'm going to try to hit the highlights here. A big part of making an impactful interactive experience is knowing when and how to use a specific technology. Like when to use a programmatic animation like HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, and when to use an animated GIF. We talked a little bit about this. We'll talk a little bit about this later on as well. We'll come back to that. Having a background in both design and development is not necessary. I kind of want to emphasize this up front. It is my background. I actually have a background. I started out as a designer, and way back in the day, we were web designers, and the web designers would end up becoming web developers too. Part of that now is, of course, we have front-end development, back-end development. We have robust development teams. A lot of that is really kind of specified in specific silos. And when we're developing the way that we do with IAMs, I think it's best to kind of get rid of those silos, right? We want to work very closely together, both as designers and developers. So it's not required that we have a background in both, but it's really, 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 really helpful. And as a result of that, we have an opportunity as designers that are working as developers, or developers in this case working as designers, to design with development in mind, right? So we can create our assets for production. We knowing what our dimensions are going to be, and file size budgets. We're making our animations easy to use. Again, whether we're doing it with a programmatic solution or whether we're doing it as a GIF animation, we're thinking about how the elements are going to live inside of that page, within the HTML DOM, how they're going to render. And that's not just a hierarchy of rendering, but also how the elements are going to layer on top of each other. Whether we should preload images, whether we should use a sprite sheet to reduce HTTP requests. These are all things that we need to think about as designers going into development. for these experiences, especially within Braze. We have to make sure that we live within inside of the limitations that are set within that platform. And it's a very robust platform. Effectively, if you can think it, we can do it. But it still does have, like 5 megabyte requirements. So we have to make sure that all of the code and images and everything that we use all live within inside 5 megabytes. So that's kind of one of the big challenges that we have. One of the things that we have to consider, especially as design. And that's why we want to think about those things right up front. It's very important for us to put all that up front in our design process so that we're designing and then exporting those assets in a way that can be used effectively. So,
Rick, there are a couple of
yeah,
abbreviations and acronyms on this slide, like HTML DOM and WCAG. Could you explain those a little bit more?
sure. So the DOM is the document object model, and basically, without getting too technical, it's a way to when a web page is loaded, the way that it renders the elements on a page. So everything is nested within inside of HTML tags, and those can be, text, paragraphs. We use divs a lot. Divs are just kind of a divisional area that allow us to specify something. You can make it like a background color. We can overlap things with them. Divs are very powerful. HTML5 introduced a whole host of very specific objects that we can use within the HTML. I think the big one probably is video, and we can use those here too. That's all part of what we can do within the DOM. So when I say the DOM, what I'm really referring to here is the way that the objects are rendering on screen, either within a website, in a traditional sense, or within the in-app experience. Everything that you see there is effectively part of a web page, right?
Got it. Awesome. Okay, great. And then what about
Yeah.
WCAG?
Oh yeah. So WCAG, that stands for, what does that stand for? I apologize. The WCAG is a organization that defines accessibility standards. And I apologize that I don't actually have the full name. Web something, whatever it is. Basically, they're an organization that defines what best practices web developers should be using to render how things should appear for people who might have disabilities or need, extra assistance in viewing a web page. We're talking about things like text sizes, colors. Color contrast is very important to have enough color contrast. We're designing for these. Those are things that we're taking into account right off the bat. This is all part of that rapid prototyping, and I'll talk about this in a little bit as well. Where we're making sure that we build with accessibility in mind. And the WCAG is the organization that defines those accessibility standards. They have 3 different rating systems, A, AA, and AAA. AAA is very restrictive, so the higher that you go, the more restrictive that it becomes. We shoot for AA, which is an industry standard. Almost every organization that I've ever worked with goes for AA compliance. AAA would be for organizations that are specifically, that's their main demographic, right, is people with accessibility issues. So we want to make sure that, we're giving ourselves the freedom to make something really pretty, but also still taking in mind that people with disabilities or accessibility issues have an opportunity to use the experience the way that we want to see it. So the kind of finding that balance is kind of what the trick is. So that's where the AA comes in.
Okay, great. And yeah, why don't you jump into rapid prototype mindset next?
Yeah. So let's talk about rapid prototyping. This is a fun concept, and I mentioned it briefly. Back in the day, it used to be we have web designers, and they were acting as both designers and developers. Rapid prototyping is kind of going back to that same mindset, where we have a small team, whether it is a single individual or whether it is a small group, but they have to work closely together, and that's the key. It's really kind of an agile system, a literal agile, not an agile necessarily workflow. But that all happens together, right? And a lot of that design and development, and even the conceptualization, what Scott was mentioning, that's all happening with kind of overlapping roles. So we have, designers working as strategists, and then they take those and they create assets that are for development purposes. So they're handing off assets that can be dropped right into Braze that we can use immediately within our web applications that are formatted the correct size, that are using the right colors, that sort of thing. And so having this rapid prototyping mindset is an idea that as you're developing, or as you're designing, you're also developing at the same time. Those roles overlap. And again, strategy can be part of that too. This idea doesn't work. Let's try a different idea. We're rebuilding this system so that it looks a little different and it operates in a different way. That's all of what's happening within that rapid prototyping mindset. It is more waterfall. I made a joke about it being agile, and it's not agile. I wouldn't use this necessarily as advice. I wouldn't recommend this to larger development teams. This works best for something like an in-app message, where you have a smaller group of individuals who are highly talented working on creating something in a quick fashion. That's where that rapid comes in, right? So that's kind of the rapid prototyping mindset.
Got it.
Hannah, is there
Okay.
anything else I should add with this? Or Bobby, did you have a?
Oh, no, I was actually going to ask Hannah how, as you're thinking about IAMs, especially versus email, what are kind of like the big differences or like more flexibility that you have within an IAM?
You have so much flexibility. It's so nice. You can make code so pretty. You don't have to worry about tables. It's so great. You can have animations. The 5 MB limit's still there, but you have a lot more flexibility. You can use JavaScript to get the pretty swipes. You're not just restricted to GIFs, to where GIFs default on some email clients where it's just the first frame that shows. You have that flexibility as long as you test it. A big thing with this rapid prototyping is why we always prefer it is so that way if we need to pivot on something, as soon as possible. So that way it helps the timeline not drag out. Like you had touched on earlier, when we build games, a lot of us hop in because we're excited to play it. We're all excited to test it. You're kind of killing two birds with one stone. We share it with everybody at Stitch because we're all excited to see it because the stuff's always cool. But then we're also testing on multiple devices, all different screen sizes. People all have different user experiences. So like where my eye goes might not be the exact same place where Rick's eye goes. I personally, knowing that I've had a background in like UX testing, for those kinds of things, I like to try and break it. See if I click somewhere random on the screen, does it break it? It usually doesn't because Rick and Mike have already tested that. And so making sure that like the data is logging correctly when someone does a really weird user experience, that kind of stuff. That all comes into play when you do that rapid prototyping because you're able to catch those things early on if you need to.
Awesome. Great. Thank you both. Pivoting to now that we've kind of gone through the process of not only the strategy, but then how we start to think about the game, how we design it, and build out that rapid prototype. Mike, we'll kick it over to you to start talking through how we actually build the game. Shortly after I walk through kind of the anatomy of these games. So, like I said, we walked through the strategy, we've walked through the design. So then, how do we actually go about building these games inside of Braze? And Rick mentioned it earlier that anything that you can think of within an app message, you can essentially do within Braze. And that's what's really nice about the complexity and the power of Braze. But especially if you're starting with your first IAM, it will likely start or be better to start with an out of the box template. Main reason being is you don't want to put a lot of time and effort into something you're not sure that your audience or your customers will be receptive to. But there's a good talk track around how do we decide, is this going to be an out of the box gamification or IAM? Is this going to be something that we really build out that's going to be custom and be a multi level type of experience? And so we want to think about all those things as we're going into the game. The next thing is about data collection and how we actually leverage that data. Every single thing that you do inside of a game. So, for example, the swipe game, every time you swipe left or swipe right, every single one of those situations is then cataloged and recorded inside of Braze. That's really important because we don't need someone to finish the game or take a certain number of actions. Every single action that they take, we can then write to their Braze profile and use for a future reference point. which is also really important because it's not only important to think about the design or the prototype of the game, but we want to think about what happens after the game. So, for example, if there is a matching game and someone matches fries or a burger or something like that, we want to take that and then put them down another journey or another experience that's similar to that. We don't want it to just stop right there, right? We want to think about the whole life cycle of our customer and how they're interacting with our brand. So really important to not only just have the game, but then also what's going to happen next after the game. And then lastly is integration with the rest of your stack. So especially when we're thinking about types of games that might reward points or dollars or anything like that, we want to make sure it's interconnected with our CDP, our loyalty platform, as well as our data warehouse and analytics tools. So that way we can measure it the right way and see if it was successful and then use that as a starting point for our next game as well. So what this can look like is where, Mike, I'll kick it over to you to walk through like the left-hand side here of how these games really come to life.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Bobby. Appreciate it. So, yeah, in this slide, I'll talk a little bit about what a Braze in-app message can look like when you treat it as more of a mini experience rather than just a simple pop-up. So, adding custom code into that can help you achieve a lot, actually. For instance, in this specific example, we're using an external JavaScript library called Hammer.js, and this basically helps us facilitate that swiping motion for the swipe game. Obviously, this isn't only limited to external JavaScript libraries. You can create and add your own custom JavaScript functions. So here, what we're doing for the swipe game is we're logging each swipe locally to assign a persona and then ultimately personalize the reward delivery. So as soon as the user hits that reward, that's whenever we collect all that data and we send it over to Braze. So in this example, if the user were to swipe 4 times to the left, they would get the classic burger persona. On the other hand, if they would have swiped maybe 4 times to the right or more, they would have seen a completely different reward delivery. So it's pretty cool to use that custom JavaScript function feature. That leads us straight into the enhanced data strategy and personalization piece. So in the same way that we can use custom JavaScript to create different functionality in terms of the game itself, we can also leverage those JavaScript functions to collect the necessary data. In this case, we're collecting them as custom attributes, which we will touch on in a future slide. We can grab all of that data, send it over to Braze, and then we can use that for future segmentation and messaging. So, like how I said before, in this example, this person landed on a classic burger persona. So we can use that to, in the future, have a personalized banner in the home screen. We can personalize an email, maybe even a follow-up in-app message in the future. So it's pretty cool to use the custom code feature. So Bobby, I'll kick it over to you for the UX optimization and terms and conditions portion.
Yeah, similar to what Scott was saying earlier, we want to keep these games more on the simple side versus complex. So anytime a game can be less than 60 seconds, that's nirvana for us, is we want to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible while making sure that, like Mike was saying, we're collecting the data that we want, so that way we can propagate that down to whatever next action or experience we want our customers to have. The other key component here, which no one likes to talk about legal things, but it's also really important that we have our terms and conditions integrated throughout the game as well. Typically, that means right at the beginning of the game and then at the end of the game as well. But just always make sure you're checking with your legal and compliance teams to figure out exactly where they want that verbiage to live. And then Mike and Rick, I'll let you guys talk to bringing these games to life through animation.
Awesome. Thank you. So, yeah, like how Bobby said, Rick and I will talk to you guys through what Rick, I'm assuming that you would agree with me, what one of the bigger components to bringing an in-app message to life and actually, prettying it up and giving the user an overall better experience, rather than just having static images, we can have really cool animations, right? So there's really two options when it comes to animations with Braze in-app messages. The first one being the programmatic animation route. Last slide, I talked a little bit about Hammer.js and how we use that to facilitate the swipe feature. In the instance of animation, we're really building based off of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So really, as far as animation goes, we can treat it like we would a web page on a browser, right? So what makes the swiping gestures that you're seeing right now smooth is we're taking custom JavaScript functions and, we're telling it exactly what to do, right? So the way that the cards work is you can tap on the card and then you can move it around the screen, drag it around, and then you flick it essentially to, whichever direction you're wanting to go with. For if there's an instance for some reason the code doesn't register that swipe, it'll anchor back to its original position, right? That's all animation done through CSS, done through JavaScript, and you can get a little bit more fancy with it too. I know the first instance of the swipe game that we built, whenever you would swipe either to the left or to the right, you would have an emoji that kind of showed up on the screen and then it would float up. See, Hannah and Rick are nodding because they remember it. So they would show up all around the screen and then they would kind of float up until they were, out of field of view. So really anything that you can think of to do, you can create, again, keeping in mind the 5 MB limit. So whenever you start to get a little bit more complex with your animation, maybe you want something a little bit more robust, maybe you're wanting to layer those animations together, it starts to get a little bit heavy for the in-app message. And again, we got to take into consideration that 5 MB limit. So that takes us into the second option as far as animations goes. And Rick, I'll kick over to you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So the second option in this case being the use of GIF animations. GIFs are really powerful in that, we use external applications like After Effects, Adobe After Effects, or Adobe Photoshop even, or, things like DaVinci Resolve that allow us to use animation tools, in a professional sense. These animation tools can do anything from videos to, motion graphic design. We use those tools to create videos that are then exported as GIF animations. These GIF animations are very fancy, but also, they have some limitations, and I really want to bring those up. Specifically, they're limited to 256 colors. I think that's kind of the big one that generally has the most frustrations around it. We have to really be mindful of what colors we're using, and we have tools that we can maximize the colors used to really make sure that it doesn't look like a GIF animation. It's not like what we had back in the day, where it was the little hammer guy on the web page. No. So they can be really robust. They can be very smooth. Those are all part of it, but they are still limited to 256 colors. The graphics themselves are also dithered. So, there might be some color interpolation that happens. We have to be mindful of that. Again, we have tools that allow us to really push this as much as possible to make it, from a visual perspective, still look very robust. But we are limited to 256 colors. GIFs do allow for transparency. So we can use these within a web page and overlap them on top of other elements, or behind or on top. We can use that transparency, but keep in mind that transparency counts as one of the 256 colors, and that transparency does not allow for effectively alpha channel opacity, which means that it's either transparent or it's not transparent. With PNGs, for example, which are not animated, we can use the full spectrum of transparency, and that really allows for some very robust images that can be displayed on screen, especially when we're talking again of overlapping those elements. But with GIF animations, you really only have the one layer of transparency, or the one color of transparency. So you have to be really mindful of how any shades that might be, like, think of a drop shadow, for example. This is where that tends to come up a lot. How that drop shadow is going to appear, what color is going to be behind that drop shadow to display on screen. And so we can kind of work with it. We're doing this with some of our clients right now, in fact, which is why it's kind of top of mind for me. But layering in that transparency as part of the GIF animation can really make it, bring back that limitation from being something that's a deal breaker. And again, as we mentioned, and it's worth repeating over and over and over, we have 5 megabytes. Ideally, we don't want to get anywhere near that 5 MB limit. So the less megabytes that we use, overall for our in-app experiences in part of these, these games. The better. That being said, games, they're fun, they're visuals, so they do have a lot of on-screen graphics and stuff, and we kind of want to lean into that generally, as you can see on screen right now. But yeah, so that's kind of the limitations with using GIF animations. We can use GIF animations in line with animations on the screen. So, or JavaScript animations, excuse me. So we can combine these two effects, and we do that generally a lot. I think it looks really good. So, we have a lot of options when it comes to, deciding if this is going to be a programmatic solution or if this is going to be, an image-based solution or a GIF animation.
Rick, a question from the audience. Are SVG animations available?
SVG animations are available. This is one of the things that we're currently experimenting with. Braze supports it, so we're finding use cases to use it as much as we can. This is still kind of a new technology, so a bit of unexplored country, but yeah, let's go for it. SVG animations are the future, and I think they remove file size, are generally a lot smaller with SVGs. We can use more than 256 colors, and they allow for that full alpha channel transparency. So there's a lot of benefits to using them.
Awesome. Thanks. Mike, back to you.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Bobby. So for this slide, I'm going to talk about the question that is always on a marketer's mind, right? And that is, how can we take this gameplay and then turn it into actual tangible data? The really cool thing about using custom code when it comes to Braze in-app messages is we have access to using the Braze Bridge object really in any way that we want to. If you take a look at the snippet on the top right, what we're doing is we're submitting the swipe counts for left and right, swipe counts as individual custom attributes, right? So there's going to be a custom attribute for the left swipes, and there's going to be another custom attribute for the right swipes. So it's pretty cool because we can actually send this data over to Braze almost in real time, thanks to that Braze Bridge immediate data flush. So literally as soon as the way that we coded it in this instance is it doesn't send until the user hits the end card. We have to keep in mind the data points that come into play. So we don't really want to collect every single swipe when they do it, right? So the best way to do it is to collect kind of a tally of the swipe counts, and then at the end, we send it over to Braze. That way we only have to update Braze once. We don't have to really worry about the data points at that point. Using all of that information, again, we touched a little bit on it on a couple of previous slides. We use that information to kind of personalize the end screen, right? So it's not really limited to only custom attributes. We can really collect anything that we want. We can collect lock clicks, right? Whenever somebody presses the closeout button. We can collect whenever a user clicks on a certain option. We can collect whenever a user swipes. We can also collect events. A lot of the things that we do with our clients is we collect whenever a user starts a session, at least for the in-app message, sorry. We can send it over an event with, certain information, what canvas or what campaign it is a part of. We can send whenever it's completed. We can send whenever a user collects a reward. There's really a lot that we can do as far as data collection. And again, using that data flush Braze Bridge object, it gets sent to Braze and lives in the profile or anywhere else pretty much instantly. And then we can start collecting that data, and then we can start leveraging it for emails, for more in-app messages, for push, and we use that with Liquid. I know a project that Rick and I worked on recently, we had a data collection process as far as like a in-app message experience. And this in-app message wasn't served only once. A user could really access it whenever they wanted. And based on the first time that they played through that experience, playing it multiple times throughout the week, they saw, different experiences, right? So for example, if they had already collected a reward from the first time they played it, the second time they played it, they wouldn't get that reward assigned to them because they already got those points. So there's a lot that you can do as far as data collection, as far as logic for the game as far as, overall experience, right? You can tailor an experience to a user based off of data that we've collected in the past. So yeah, it's pretty cool. You're taking a game that, is supposed to be like a playful, quick interaction, and then we're turning it into essentially an ongoing opportunity to connect with a user on a way deeper level. You get that personalization.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Yeah,
Of
and
course.
the other thing to keep in mind here is what it looks like with kind of the whole end-to-end architecture. So from the time a game launches all the way through a little bit what we talked about earlier, how do we integrate this into the rest of our MarTech stack? So the game launches, the player interacts, like Mike was just walking us through. We can collect all of that interaction data and bring that into Braze and capture it, add it to the Braze profile. And then we want to make sure we share it out or integrating other elements of our tech stack to make sure that we are redeeming points, like on the top there, integrating to our loyalty system, or pushing it into additional messaging. So maybe someone doesn't finish the game, or maybe they do, and we put them on two different canvases or two different splits within a single canvas to either have them encourage them to finish the game or tell them what's next or what they can expect in the future. But then also we want to make sure all of that data, so everything that we collect in especially the conversions, any kind of transactions of how we're measuring the success of these games comes through down into currents. So that way we can have it within our data warehouse and then report on it, not only within Braze, but outside of Braze as well. So that way we can see a holistic picture of whether or not this game was a success. And speaking of measuring success, Scott, I'll kick it back over to you to walk us through kind of making sure that we're measuring what matters and how we're thinking about that specifically for a game.
Yeah, exactly. We've gone through the whole process of building out. We know what the game should be from a strategy perspective, the sort of like creative and like the technical build side. So now when you're thinking about how do we actually see if this was successful and like build this out for further iterations, we're looking at defining like really clear goals and objectives for what specifically we want the behavior outcome to be and what we want to influence the user to do while we're doing this. So this has got to align back to our broader business goals or our broader marketing goals. An example of like a KPI that could fit into here is boost purchase frequency. And then once we've really had the sort of the top piece nailed down, we can look at how we determine our actual success metrics, our big KPIs. So if we're looking at establishing a game world with how it works and that emotional arc, what KPIs do we really want people to be able to say they did for us? They checked off. Like, so it could be days between purchase. Did we see that increase or decrease? Or what did we do to really move the needle forward? Um, and then we're looking for designing for data collection. So we're going to get all of these users coming in to interact with our game. We really want to see the building of tracking and analytics right into the game itself so that we know we're measuring behavior, progress, and can get results reliably. So that KPI could be capture custom events and export to a data warehouse. And then lastly, as all good marketers, we're always trying to analyze and optimize the work we've put out. So we're looking to continuously review that data, assess its performance, and then adapt campaign elements into better insights for improved outcomes. So that could be, review reports in the campaign retrospective.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing we all know as marketers, marketing's never done. Same thing with gamification. So after we finish a game or a game completes over a period of time, how do we then take that to make the next game that we have even better? And as we're thinking about KPIs, we always think about things or KPI in two ways. One is it increasing revenue or is it increasing engagement? And you can see some of the key categories that we've outlined here, but all of these either fall back to revenue or engagement, even something like retention and recovery, right? We're trying to bring people back to be back engaged to drive another transaction. Even brand perception is all about driving revenue and driving engagement. So how do we make sure that every single thing that we do, yeah, obviously gamification, but even things outside of that is driving to one of these key KPIs. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining. We really appreciate it. There are two questions from the audience. First from Rihanna, what is possible with Braze IAM? I think that the team has already shared over the course of the last 45 minutes that anything is possible, right? So as long as it fits within that 5 MB storage limit, anything is possible. Next is from Alexandra. What are the benefits to building in Braze using IAM versus custom dev with the product team? The biggest benefit between the two of like launching first with Braze, or Braze has some nice, simple, out-of-the-box templates that you can leverage for your first few gamifications. And that's really important because especially as you're launching it, especially if you're a lean team, you want to figure out how can we launch these things quickly so that way we're not spending a lot of time and effort on something that we're not sure how the audience is going to react to. Versus if we know that our audience is really receptive to gamification, we see a lot of revenue and a lot of engagement from it. That's where it probably makes sense to how can we do something that's more custom development? Maybe it's a multi-week type of game where we have people continuously coming back to the app and they're consistently getting something out of it that drives a little bit more engagement, a little bit more revenue, but also takes a little bit more time to develop. Thank you all again for your time today. Really appreciate it. We'll share the recording out with all of the registered attendees and really appreciate your time today. Talk to you soon.